Close your eyes for a second. Let's do a thought experiment. It's early spring after a long winter. The seasonal depression should be wearing off soon, but it's not. You're pissed at the government, at the price of everything. It's late. You're in bed, phone 6 inches from your face, scrolling through the usual crap.
Canada is objectively broken.
Guys, homelessness destroyed Canada.
Canada is on the brink of becoming a failed state.
Canada used to be a great place to live.
Like he's leading that country on a road to legitimate communism. It's very dangerous. And I think most Canadians are fed up with it.
You're sick of being told you're the problem for being a man and for being white, for just existing. You feel like this country doesn't have room for you anymore. Then you see something different. An account you've never seen before, no hashtags, no rainbow flags, no corporate virtue signaling. Just photos and videos of dudes in the woods, full camo, doing tactical drills, moving like they've done this before. The gear looks real, and so do the weapons. These guys don't look like they're playing pretend. They look like a serious anti-government militia that wants to take back control. And it piques your interest. Now, open your eyes. Because that wasn't a hypothetical.
Breaking news for you now. 4 people from Quebec have been arrested for what's being called ideologically motivated violent extremism.
The RCMP says some of the men arrested in this case are active members of the Canadian Armed Forces.
The news release from the RCMP has details about weapons, ammunition, and explosives.
The men were allegedly planning to forcibly seize land in the Quebec City area.
One of the 4 men arrested was allegedly trying to recruit members to their anti-government militia through Instagram. 3 are now facing terrorism-related charges, and the 4th is charged with stockpiling explosives and prohibited weapons. The seizure was the largest cache of weapons and components in any terrorism incident in Canadian history. None of the allegations have been proven in court. Extremism in our armed forces isn't new.
Canadian military's first major reckoning with far-right extremism was in the 1990s, after paratroopers on a peacekeeping mission in Somalia tortured and killed a 16-year-old boy.
Patrick Matthews, the former Canadian Armed Forces reservist, will spend 9 years in prison for his role as a key figure in a plot to trigger a race war in Virginia.
And just last month,
the Canadian Armed Forces is investigating members of a private Facebook group that included content the Army's commanding officer has called abhorrent.
Posts in the group featured racist, misogynistic, homophobic, and anti-Semitic comments and images.
Our military has a serious problem. This episode, I'm talking to Andy Knight, a distinguished professor of international relations at the University of Alberta. He had an explosive report for the DND where he dug into extremism and white supremacy within Canada's military. And he actually interviewed white supremacists in the armed forces. Let's get into it. Do you believe that right now there could be white supremacists in the Canadian military?
Yes, I think so. And in fact, I know so because we just completed a major study for the Department of National Defense. There are pockets of individuals with white supremacy ideology. I call it xeno-racist ideology. So it's not widespread across all the units of the military, but there are pockets within the military.
How did you come to that determination?
Well, because we were able to speak to some of the individuals who had this sort of ideology.
What did those conversations sound like?
Some of them were pretty pretty bizarre. In fact, one of the statements that I did not use in my report to the military, because I thought it was so explosive, was one individual who said that he joined the military to learn how to kill brown and black people. Now, that was shocking to me. But when I relayed this to senior members of Canadian Armed Forces and to the Department of National Defense at a meeting a briefing I held with them in Ottawa, some of them shook their heads. They said, yes, we know that this sort of thing happens from time to time. There are individuals who have that intent, right, of learning how to kill brown and black people. Now, this is very, very much anathema to what the military is supposed to be doing, especially the Canadian military, which prides itself on being peacekeepers, guarding and serving and protecting individuals in different parts of the globe. Many of those places have brown and black people. I know that the purpose of the military is to kill. I mean, it's not. We have to be very clear about that. That's the ultimate goal of the military, is to kill the enemy, whatever the enemy is. But to have that kind of mentality and that kind of ideology, you have to ask yourself, where does this come from? We also realized that from the convoy back in 2022, remember when Ottawa was shut down by the convoy, and we recognized right away that there were some active military individuals responsible for helping to plan the convoy. This sort of operation cannot be done without the kind of tactical knowledge that militaries have. So that's why it got me thinking that perhaps within the military there are individuals like this who join the military but with nefarious intent. In other words, they're willing to learn the skills that the military has to offer, the technical skills. They're learning how to use ammunition and weapons. This is a very, very important skill to have if you want to try to overthrow a government or you want to take over a land, as we saw in Quebec just recently.
So you spoke to higher ups in the Canadian military about this stuff. Maybe talk to me a little bit about what the reaction was like. Like, I'm in shock. Were they shocked?
Well, you see, I think that they know that some of this stuff is happening within the military. The problem with the military, of course, the Canadian military, is that they like to keep things in-house, right? There's a lot of camaraderie in the military. There's a lot of sense that, it's us versus them. There's a divide between the civilian population and the military population. My challenge to the military officers is if they want to do that, then they have to be able to expose these individuals. They have to expose them to the police force, the RCMP, the intelligence services of Canada, so that we can deal with these problems, because the military is unable to deal with them on their own.
Is this a Canada problem? Like, is there something unique about our military in particular?
This is not, limited to Canada. In the United States, there are instances of extremism within the United States military. In many European militaries, there are the same sort of things. Sometimes there are extremists who are left-wing, and sometimes there are extremists who are right-wing. The big challenge that we have today in Canadian military is that most of the incidences of extremism are coming from a right-wing source as opposed to the left-wing source. So there are a lot of people who consider Canada as a white country and the military as a protector of the white race. Not everyone in the military, of course. We're talking about the pockets of individuals who have that extremist view. They want to preserve the white race, and this idea of trying to preserve the purity of the white race is a relatively. It's not a new thing. I mean, we know that it's been in existence for a long time, but right now it's picking up steam, and I think a lot of it has a lot to do, I think, with the fact that Donald Trump became president of the United States and people felt empowered. Now they feel emboldened to talk about these things in public. So therefore it means excluding, in many cases, Black and brown individuals, and also excluding Indigenous people and LGBTQ individuals, etc. So anyone that's different from what they consider to be the true character of a military person. This goes all the way back to the history of how the military was created, the sort of Anglo-Saxon, in some cases, the iconography that we see by some on the tattoos of some of the individuals in the military speaks to that, right? White supremacist, European masculinity, Vikings, the Nordic religious symbols, and so on. All these things are part of the history, really, of the Canadian military. So there's an embedded and a structural element of racism in the military.
Yeah, the iconography and the tattoos. Pete Hegseth, I think, is a good example in the United States. He has this Crusader tattoo, I think, somewhere on his chest or his shoulder. So, yeah, it's definitely something that exists here and in the United States. I'm trying to wrap my head around this because it's like, why are these people, these extremists, white supremacists, attracted to the military? And are they joining and they're already white supremacists? Or is that something that's like brewing inside of the institution itself? Is it something that they're learning inside of the military?
That's a very good observation. I think it's a combination of the two things. One is you have 18-year-olds trying to join the military. They might already have radical ideas about how things should be governed, right? And they bring those ideas with them into the military. In other words, the military is not doing an adequate job of screening those individuals out based on their ideology. It's not easy to screen a person for their ideology, right? They don't want to tell you what their ideology is. You may not know what it is until they get into the military and then act out.
What is the screening process like? Like, do you have a sense it's rigorous? What are we talking about here? Like, hey, hi, what's your name? How old are you? Are you a white supremacist? Yes or no?
You have to bear in mind that the military needs to have more recruits.
Yeah, we have a huge recruitment problem.
In other words, they can't make the bar too high to screen out all the people because they'll never have enough members of the force. So I don't think that the screening process is as diligent and as rigid or rigorous as it ought to be. Now, I've heard other stories from other people in this process of interviewing individuals, and they said, of course, that used to be the case, but now they're being a little bit more rigorous. I wonder the extent to which they are able to screen individuals for the kind of social media interaction that these individuals have. You can be a radical, right? Sitting in your mother's bedroom as an 18-year-old kid. You don't have to fly to Iraq or to Iran or to Turkey or to any other part of the Middle East or something to become radicalized. You can do that in your mother's bedroom. And that a lot of young individuals find themselves doing that. And I think that's happening in the broader society. So it's inevitable that we're going to have that same percentage of individuals who want to be an extremist or radical finding themselves in the military after they join the military.
You know, it's interesting that you're talking about the social media aspect because in the Quebec case, the RCMP said that at least one of the people allegedly involved in the plot was running some sort of Instagram account that they believe may have been used for recruitment purposes. They had images and videos of them allegedly training in the woods and images of gear and guns. Like, we're talking about Instagram. I'm not even talking about the corners of the internet that nobody knows about. It's like out there for everyone to see. I don't know. What did you make of that?
I see that as almost like icing on the cake because if you think about, obviously these individuals were bold enough to use Instagram to recruit other people that have similar kind of ideologies, right? So this is really serious, and I think military leaders have to have a little bit more accountability now in terms of what the people under them are doing with their spare time the kind of sites that they're going into, and maybe even checking to see how they're conversing with others on popular sites like Instagram and TikTok and other sites. So, because obviously they're using those instruments as well to radicalize others and to and perhaps to even get people to join their cause.
As an immigrant, I've been keeping my eye on how the conversation of immigration in this country has changed over the past year. It's taken a pretty sharp turn. There's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, whether that be in person or online. You talk a lot about this future so-called race war. How do you square that with the kind of conversations that we're hearing and that are taking place about immigration in this country?
There is within the military as an institution certain structural racist tendencies that goes all the way back to when the military was founded, the British military. It goes all the way back to the French joining the Canadian military as well. And those European-centric kind of notion of what the military ought to be crept into the military. So they've been operating for a long time under those kinds of understandings of what the military is all about. I don't think that's changed a lot, but Canada has become an increasingly diverse country, as you know. The question is, are we acting fast enough to include people of diversity into the military? And my sense is that it's probably not fast enough, because today, still 90% of the military are white males. Despite all the talk about EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I understand that within certain parts of the military, some of the senior leaders talk about DEI with a nod and a wink, in the sense that we're doing this only because the government is trying to foist this onto us. But in actual fact, they're not really as interested in bringing about the kind of diversity that's necessary for the military to reflect what Canada is all about.
Is there a version of this story where it's a combination of this sense of economic instability, this loss of purpose, and feeling like you're not really fitting into the society around you, that are bigger drivers of this radicalization and extremism than race? What do you think?
Individuals who have been doing very well financially, who have been privileged in a lot of ways, are seeing their privilege slipping away. And so it's easy to blame this this lack of economic progress, for example. Easy to blame it on immigrants coming into the country. The immigrants are here taking their jobs away, or they're here, taking advantage of the social services that we pay our taxes towards and that sort of thing. Without realizing that the immigrants that come into the country also contribute back into the country. They pay their taxes. They get jobs. They create jobs for themselves and others. So this notion has to be, we have to dissuade any individuals that talk about, it's the fault of the immigrants that they're undergoing some sort of economic downturn. The economic downturn is happening, but it's happening for other factors other than simply migrants coming into the country. So I think it's important to have that, embrace that diversity, treat it as a strength rather than a weakness. And Canada could be much better off and could be actually an example to the rest of the world.
How close are we, do you believe, that we are to a homegrown, ideologically motivated attack carried out by someone trained in the military or part of the military? I mean, we saw the Quebec thing that just took place, thankfully stopped before something happened. Where's your thinking on that?
Well, thankfully, somebody blew the whistle on those individuals, because my understanding is that it wasn't the military that identified these individuals. It was a tip-off to the RCMP. Thankfully, that tip-off allowed the RCMP to intervene. And we know from the statements made about the amount of ammunition that was involved and the kind of weapons that they've accumulated, that this could have been a very serious problem in Quebec. So I think where we are is that we're very close to seeing some major schism in the whole country if we don't deal with these kinds of problems early on. And I think for that point, I would say that we have to address not just what's going on in the military, but what's going on in broader society as well, because there's many individuals in the broader society who are lashing on to this kind of ideology that's very, very bad for the country.
Look, I'm anticipating critics arguing that, these are just a few bad apples. You're overemphasizing how rampant this is, how big of an issue this is. What do you say to those critics?
If you have one or two bad apples, they can actually spoil the entire bunch of apples. So over time, this creeping xenoracism, if it festers over time and not dealt with at the very beginning, we may have a situation where this thing spreads across the military. Bear in mind that the mindset of many individuals within the military is to conform to certain standards, to obey the discipline that's there. That's all part of the characteristics of the military, right? So that's easy for them to create a situation where the one or two bad apples start to spoil the entire bunch of apples. If we don't deal with this in an urgent manner, then there could be threats to the operational readiness of the military. There could be problems in terms of eroding of the public confidence that the individuals have in the military. And there are also the possibility of security risk. I mean, white supremacist networks have actually radicalized military members, and it jeopardizes national security. We can't have individuals who are basically working at cross purposes with our governments and become anti-government in many cases, because they have their own delusional ideas of what Canada ought to be.
I've seen report after report after report after military statement after military statement that we have a problem in the Canadian military. Have there been reforms to address these problems?
I did a briefing with the Canadian military and with the Department of National Defense in Ottawa at the headquarters in Ottawa. And I was relieved to find that there were senior members of the Department of National Defense who had already taken a look at some of the recommendations that my report had given and had sort of marked off the ones that were low-hanging fruit. In other words, that could be dealt with almost immediately. They even give reference to those actions that have already been taken before the report came out. So obviously they've been working on these issues. Also, they realize that there are certain issues that cannot be addressed immediately. So they're more medium term, and others are much more longer term that require perhaps changes in legislation of the government, perhaps different guidelines for senior military officials to undertake. So obviously they're working on it.
Have you gotten any pushback on any of your reporting, on any of your commentary? Is it widely received and accepted?
Well, we live in the western part of Canada, which is like the epicenter for some of this xenoracist thinking. So I had to expect that there was going to be pushback. In fact, before I actually started my research, I think Canadian Press and Global Mail, they made a statement about the fact that Professor Knight is going to be undertaking this research. I immediately got pushback from some of the right-wing sources within Western Canada. Some right-wing newspapers and online journals and so on pushed back immediately. And then recently, I've had threats on my life that the RCMP is monitoring and the Edmonton police is monitoring. And I got called in to the universities by the University's Protection Services so I can listen to the threats, which were mostly online threats and voicemail threats. So, this is it's not easy to be in this kind of field.
Why do you think you get responses like that?
But I think misunderstanding of what the intent is. Like some people, would probably think that I'm sort of anti-military, which is not the case. I mean, if you look at all my work that I've done on peacekeeping, the work I've done on the United Nations, and so on, you'll see that I'm very supportive of the military as an the establishment of the military. So it's not as though I'm sort of against anything that the military is doing. It's just that I'm here to help to improve the performance of the military, and also to bring awareness to what could be problematic for the military in the longer term.
Andy, thank you so much for making the time. This has been really insightful. I really appreciate it.
But it's nice to be with you, Noor, and I hope that the listeners get a good sense of what we're trying to do with this study, and the fact that there is optimism here as well, not just pessimism, but there's also optimism that once we root out this kind of racist thinking, chances are we can move on to a much better kind of military in the future.
That's been this week in Canadian politics. If you liked this video, if you were startled by this video, if you were concerned by this video, please leave us a like, give us a comment, share it if you want other people to know what kind of problems we have in our military. You can also hit the bell if you want to be notified whenever we publish. You can support us at canadaland.com/join. We would really appreciate your support. And it's Noor Azrieh, host of Canada Land Politics, signing off.